It's been quite a while since the last Hoist Devlog. I hit some issues I didn't quite know how to resolve and felt a little bit overwhelmed with what was left. I eventually picked it back up after several months and I decided to do a little bit of work every other night just to chip away at some of the smaller features. I also made some large changes in this devlog to resolve some of the issues, so make sure to stick around for that. I made a few changes before I hit months and months of procrastination. The first of these was to fix the movement, so occasionally the character would jolt upwards when running across multiple tiles or get stuck entirely. And I mentioned this in the last devlog, and Neat Games put a comment on and told me that I needed to be using a composite collider just to combine all these colliders into one collider. So I did that, and there's no longer edges between each of the tiles that the player was getting stuck on. We've got smooth movement there now, which is good. But yeah, go check out Neat Games because they do some really cool devlogs. So I'll put a link to their channel in the description. So I then followed a tutorial on how to create a jump that allows the player to tap the button to do a small jump and to hold the button to do a larger jump. Next up, I clamped the player's velocity so movement would feel a bit more consistent and you couldn't get to ridiculous speeds which are a bit uncontrollable. So during this time I also noticed there's some glitchiness with ropes being wrapped around objects so they can sort of push them around and into the floor, and I think this is because of the weight of all the nodes on top of the object is just too much. Might just do some more weight balancing. The rope does need to be fairly heavy for it to be able to interact with things properly. So the next change is pretty much what led to the procrastination period and kind of killed the project for a bit. So I knew I had an issue with the player standing on slopes and slipping off them. Because of the majority of the edges in the game were slopes, this was quite a bit of a problem because you'd miss a lot of jumps or you'd hit them weird and slide off. So I fixed this by adding a force based on the angle of the slope when you're trying to move and reducing friction, and when you're stood still the friction increases so you can stand on a slope without slipping as well. So the reason that this change led to months of procrastination is because the slope change forced me to rewrite my movement system and it kind of made it feel like it was off. So I spent a long time just tweaking values. This is technically the third time I've had to do it for Hoist because if you didn't know, Hoist was built off a bounty hunter game I was working on, and in that game I had the movement system working perfectly. I lost my changes, had to remake it, and it was never quite the same. And then this third time, again, the feeling's slightly off. So it basically made me want to quit because I'd done this thing so many times, and it was a nightmare trying to get this movement right. So it kind of put me off for a bit. And I'm still tweaking a lot of the movement stuff. So you will see mainly just the demo level because I don't want to go design lots of things and then have to change all those levels if I change the movement. So several months go by, and I'm annoyed at myself for having the project on the back of my mind in an unknown state, especially after a positive reaction to me starting these devlogs. So I decided to start chipping away at the game again, and it was painful. I tested myself with something simple, so simply upgrading the Unity version, and sure enough, it messed up my project. Not too bad, but it messed with all the lighting, so everything became overexposed, and I couldn't quite get it back to where I wanted graphically, so I just kind of left that after I'd tweaked it a little bit. I then went on to make a prediction system that would prevent you from throwing objects inside other objects or tiles, and it seemed to work, but we'll have to get back to this because this is a recurring issue. So next up I wanted to make the player bag detachable. So this was part of my original design, and the first part was just making it so the player wouldn't cause errors if he was missing the rope objects that are needed. I then created a separate bag object, and this had the same functionality as the player, so we could shoot the rope out and attach to things. The original idea was that the backpack could hold down levers or make bridges for the player to walk across, so it could be dropped and controlled separate and then picked back up again. This led to a lot of bugs. So there's this insane one, for example, where it picks up a sphere and then it just spins around like crazy. And yeah, this is the point where I decided that maybe scaling back things might be a good idea. So I brought the scope of the game back a bit, and that'll be a recurring theme later on as well. So that functionality is gone. So another part of the reason to scrap this bag separation stuff is because I didn't like the idea of making lots of animations for the player with and without the backpack. So after this didn't pan out, I was kind of stuck in the procrastination zone again. That was until a friend reached out to me and said they wanted to make their first game jam game and to do it with me. We kept looking at game jams, so we were looking at the weekly game jam and the themes that were coming out, and we weren't too happy with the themes, so we didn't really do anything for a long time. And then eventually, one week, he came to me and said, look, let's just do it regardless of what the theme is. We'll just say now, we'll commit into it, let's do it. So we got the theme fragmented, and sure enough, this was a theme that we struggled with and probably wouldn't have done under any other circumstance, but we decided we'd go with it, and we came up with a few different ideas. But in the end, we decided to make a game in space where you shoot fragments of debris into collection zones. So you might have seen the game trailer up between these two devlogs, and yeah, I recommend you go check it out. So to cut a long story short, we ended up ranking second in this game jam, and I'm really pleased with how the project turned out. A lot of care went into polishing this game up, and we finished it a day before the deadline. This game really gave me the motivation to push myself with Hoist. I'd also learned how to program a lot of objects which could be transferable, so I made moving platforms, and in the editor they used the line renderer so you can see where those objects are going to go. It's a lot easier to make levels with. I also made rotating platforms, which again, I can move that across at some point, and that'll be really helpful. I wanted to approach it first by pursuing areas I knew I would learn something from, to give me a quick win. So I started off by doing art. I knew my pixel art could be better, and that I would get better gradually if I practiced it. I then made a bunch of gems, heart icons, other objects like buttons and keys. I then did some research into Unity's events, and whilst it wasn't necessary, I made my health and gem collecting system use events so I could try putting them into practice. This was good because it meant I didn't have to reference objects everywhere. For example, for each gem pickup, you can see I'm calling collect gem event, and it passes the gem type, so I can update the UI only on a gem pickup event. I also now had a basic health system, and currently the health can only be affected by pressing certain keyboard keys, and it goes into half hearts, which was quite cool to do. Another way I motivated myself was to essentially spend money. I knew I wanted Metroid style rooms with my camera, so the camera was locked to the borders of the level, and I knew it could be a pain to implement. So I picked up Pro Camera 2D, as it has a lot of camera features, and spending money on it meant I had more to lose if I didn't keep going with the project. I then added a room camera using Pro Camera, so it's locked to the borders of the room, made the camera pixel perfect, and added subtle camera movement upwards or downwards based on where the mouse is. I added a shitty bridge at some point with awful artwork, and it's going to burn in a fire, and it's horrible, and it has an awkward collider shape, so yeah, it's gone. I then added one-way platforms, which I thought were pretty cool, and I achieved this with the inbuilt platform effector. I added the slime from my game Hold the Throne, with plans of it being a test enemy, and it's funny how plans change because the slime is still doing nothing to this day, although you can throw him around, which is pretty funny. It was at this point when I realised that the throwable bug was still present, which is fantastic. So to try reduce this happening, I made objects that you're holding solid so that it's harder to throw them, and don't worry, this is going to be broken again later. There was one thing on the back of my mind, and that was that I knew deep down one thing that sucked is when you missed the edge of a platform and fell, and I wanted to add a ledge climbing system to try and remedy this, but I had no idea how to do it. So I came across a video on it and listened to the theory part rather than looking at the code itself, and decided to have a go implementing it just with this theory in mind. So the theory is essentially that you draw a line from the player's eye line and the player's chest, and if the line you draw from the chest hits an object, then you must be at a wall, which is what we need for a ledge. And then if the eye line doesn't hit an object, then it means the wall has ended, so you must be at the edge of a ledge, which you can then climb up. So that's how it works in theory, is that you have the chest is touching something, but the top of the head isn't. So with this information, we can turn off the player's physics, run an animation of the player climbing up, and then teleport the player to the position of the ledge, which should be where the animation ends. So I first tested this by making the player teleport to the position as soon as he detected that ledge, which felt kind of weird because the animation was missing and you didn't really have a choice of whether you wanted to climb up or not. So I then tried one where it gave you an additional jump, so you would hold in place and then you could press the jump key again to get on top of the ledge. Now this felt a little bit less weird, because it's kind of like you're pulling yourself up fast. And I also had an idea for a sliding animation, which I did try out, and it was very ugly. But the problem was the character that I'd drawn was too complicated for my skill set. So he had like a checkered shirt on, he had this backpack that he had to figure out what was moving, he had the spiky hair, he had his face that needed moving. All of these different details on the character I didn't know where would be under certain angles. So if you're doing like a rolling animation, or you're doing, a ledge climb, where are the checkered bits on his shirt going to go? Where's his eye going to be? Where's the bag going to be? How's the bag going to be moving? All these things. It was just too much trying to figure it out with my current skill set. So whilst I tried to get these animations working, in the end I came to the conclusion that I'm shooting myself in the foot by having characters with higher pixel counts and these details. So I needed to redesign Hoist. And it wasn't a small decision. I spent several days just thinking about this and talking to friends and seeing what they thought. And there was pretty much everyone in agreement that this was the only way forward. So I made a 16x16 version of the character. And after a lot of messing around, and I will be honest, a lot of inspiration from Celeste, to create a character without a face and have it still look good. So I think I looked at rough proportions for how Celeste was and then made it into my own thing. There was a downside to reducing the pixel count, so when I get onto adding a role, it quickly became apparent to me that there are times where I feel like I won't have enough pixels to express something, and then you just have to get creative with it. So I got my ledge climb animation working, and it wasn't perfect because you could climb up anything. It was just based on angles. So I do come back and change this later. And then I went on to add the roll that I was talking about. So this allows you to quickly gain acceleration. You're still limited by the overall max velocity. And I eventually plan on making this roll prevent the player from taking damage, so you can use it to avoid enemies. And the roll is super fun to use. Like I said, difficult to animate, and I ended up following this guide for how to do a roll animation, and it was super useful. I did a few old animations back, such as picking up objects, and it's still missing a few swing animations, but it's getting there. And then I thought more about how those curved edges that I was putting this ledge climbing animation in for, they just suck. They're ugly, you slide on them, so I'm going to think about getting rid of those. So I created a test scene to mess around with hills and ledge climbing, and I'll be honest, I pretty much made this because I love to see test scenes. So there's one in the Wind Waker that I remember looking really cool, and there's been ones in other games that I've seen, and I just love the idea of having all these, like, it's like a sandbox essentially. You've got all these objects you can mess around with, and I've always liked the weird, like, simple blocks with like measurements on how tall things are and all this kind of stuff. Just interests me. So while I was messing around in my test scene, I found out that you can climb this ridiculously steep hill, but let's ignore that for now. And I tweaked the movement some more, and I made it so that the roll and swing increase your max velocity, as I always wanted these to add more to your default moves. And the roll in particular, I always wanted it to be just that little bit extra. So say you're just going to miss a platform, I want the roll to make it so you can just make it. So it was at this time where I did the planned redesign for the floor tiles and I brightened the visuals, and I felt like the game was looking and feeling great at this point. So I added speed lines to the roll and made it so that if you rolled a different way to the way you were currently travelling, it would cancel out that velocity and then add the roll's velocity over it. So this means that you can change direction in midair really easy, which is quite nice. So I then made it so the ledge grab only worked on specific tiles, so currently it only works on those edge tiles that I've specified. It doesn't work on like crates and other bits, but I can tweak that if I need more things later. So next I got some friends to playtest the demo scene and see what they thought. I got some comments saying swinging was too hard and that using the up button to jump was weird. So after some thought I changed the jump to space. I made it so that swinging was a bit easier by reducing the rope length. This meant that it forced players to jump into a swing more, which is what you need to keep the momentum going in this game. And I also simplified the rope controls. So previously you had to left click to attach the rope, and you would hold the right click after you detached to reel yourself in towards the grapple point. Problem was you then had to left click again to release the rope. So I changed this so that you left click to attach your rope and you hold right click to reel in. If you let go of right click, it detaches the rope, because there was no situation where the player really needed to stop halfway up a reel. They're pretty much only reeling to build momentum and swing. I also got rid of like scroll wheel to extend and decrease the rope because it was just not needed. So I think the simpler I make the game, the better it's going to be. So I also made it so that rolling would disconnect you from the rope, because I wanted that to be an alternative way you can exit the rope. I also wanted to make rope swinging easier by messing around with the aim assist. So the game was using a box cast to detect where nearby grapple objects were. However, you get an issue with the corners of the box nearest to the player touching the floors or walls unintentionally. So if I increase the box size, this would occur more often and would lead to the player's rope pointing in the wrong direction. Ideally, I needed a cone cast, which doesn't exist in Unity by default. So to confirm that this was the issue, I stole a little bit of code online and made it so it draws the box in the scene view so I could see what was going on. And sure enough, the box touches the floor and the walls in certain scenarios, and that's what was causing my issue. This seemed like a pain to fix, so like any sane person, I decided to instead make the game look prettier and added post-processing effects. So I added bloom, vignette, and some color correction. And this makes the game look a bit darker, and I can brighten it more later, but let me know whether you think it should be darker or lighter. The game is set in the caves after all, so it should be darker, but I'm kind of on the fence about it. So I've also been thinking about what I want to replace grapple points with, because currently they're just blobs, and it reminds me of the game Flint Hook, which has these well visualized hooks to grapple to. So I'll take a look at this in the future and try and think of something that makes sense with the cave setting. I went on to finally fix my prediction system for throwing objects. I added in sprites for the throwable objects, and you might notice these sprites are looking like they're from fragmented space, but they're actually made for Hoist and then used in fragmented space along with some sprites from other existing games from me and my friend. I then made my own animation system to simplify changing states and not having to have transitions between multiple clips in Unity's animator. I added a chain link for the rope, and finally added a custom cone cast, and it's a polygon collider, so I can try out all sorts of shapes and sizes if I want to and see what's best for aim assist. Getting to the end of my rough scripts, I feel like I did do quite a bit, even though I had a massive break, and even before fragmented space I ran a private game jam. So looking back, I feel like it hasn't been too much of a creative block. It's just been about focusing my attention elsewhere whilst I was processing the problems with Hoist in the back of my head. Hopefully things will start speeding up, and I'm going to be uploading the demo scene of Hoist to itch.io as a private link, so I'll put that in the description. So feel free to give it a play and then give me any feedback, particularly on the movement system, and if there's any ways we can make it easier for newcomers. Thanks for watching.